Choir, what a way to greet the day with risen voices and soaring harmonies. Oh my goodness, thank you. Hi.
You are beloved, and you are welcome here.
Whether tears have fallen from your eyes this past week or gleeful laughter has spilled out of your smiling mouth.
You are beloved. You are welcome here.
Whether you are feeling brave or brokenhearted, defiant or defeated, fearsome or fearful.
You are beloved. You are welcome here.
Whether you have untold stories buried deep inside or stories that have been forced beyond the edges of comfort.
You are beloved. You are welcome here.
Whether you have made promises, broken promises, or are renewing promises.
You are beloved. You are welcome here.
Whatever is on your heart, however it is with your soul at this moment.
You are beloved. You are welcome here.
In this space of welcome and acceptance, commitment and recommitment, of covenant and connection, let us worship together.
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Universalist Unitarian Church of Farmington. My name is not Bev Church. That was not able to make it this morning. Mert is under the weather. So my name is Barb Eglinton. I'm filling in for her. I am the program moderator for Program Council here and also on the Sunday Services Committee, helping to put together Sunday morning. And this morning, we are fortunate to have returning to our pulpit guest minister, Reverend Julie Brock. Reverend Julie is a native Michigander and lifelong UU. She's currently serving the First UU Church in Detroit. She loves multi-generational ministry, purposeful projects, and crossing traditional segregated lines, and the racehorse Seabiscuit. You'll have to ask her about that during coffee hour. She's happy to be with us this Sunday morning with some of her fellow Michigan UUs. I'd like to extend a special welcome to any visitors today. You can join us downstairs for coffee and conversation. While we are in the meeting house, we are observing COVID precautions and wearing masks regardless of vaccination status. Joys and sorrows will be shared later in the service, and you can do that 3 ways. You can come up to the microphone and share in person. There are blue cards in the pulpit, or in the pews, that you can fill out and put in the basket during the offering, or you can text a number that's in the order of service, and I will read it. Religious education's classes will be held after our message for all ages downstairs. So if you have a little one and you're here for the first time, you can just follow them downstairs. If you haven't done so already, please turn off your cell phone. And now I'll turn it over to Reverend Julie for Message for All Ages.
Can I steal this chair?
Absolutely.
Awesome, thank you. Hey, Munchkins, you want to come up here? So good to see everybody. Anybody that wanted to come up? Oh, come on. I know you guys are way, way, way too cool for this, but it would make me feel so good if you came up. Can you do it for the poor old minister? Thank you so much. Hi, how are you? You're good? That's great. Hi. All right, y'all, we are going to tell a story today about a kingdom in which a king decided to build a grand highway down the middle of his kingdom. And you guys are going to have to help me come up with the characters for this story. You think you can? Yeah, you're smart. You can do it. All right. So the king decided to build a grand highway down the middle of his kingdom to show what a prosperous and grand kingdom they were. And he said, before it opened, that he was going to have a contest. And the person that traveled the highway the best was going to get a chest full of gold. But he didn't say what best meant. He didn't define the term best. So all the citizens of the kingdom were trying to come up with what the king would think would be the best way to travel. So can you all think of something that might be the best way, the most impressive way to travel down a highway? Yeah. Teleportation! Yes! Yes! We could get into the definition of the word travel later, but I'm going to take the suggestion. So, there was one citizen of the kingdom who said, I am not even going to travel the traditional way. I am simply going to disappear and appear right before the king. I'm going to teleport. It will be the best and most impressive way. Does anybody else have a way that one might be able to travel? Yeah. Use a train. Oh my goodness. I am going to build tracks down the middle of the highway, or maybe to the side, because we want pedestrian space too. My husband's an urban planner. And so we are going to build a trainway down the side of the road and travel with loud, shiny, noisy steam plumes. So impressive. All right, another one? Yeah.
Or just simply walk.
Just walk. Just walk. And I am going to show off my ability to caminar. I don't know why the Spanish word came up right then, but it did. I am going to show my ability to promenade and walk daintily down the street. Yeah. Use a motorcycle. I'm going to be rad and loud and happening and ride a motorcycle down. Yeah. A car. Somebody else is going to have a big, shiny car, and their horn is going to play a song. It's going to be like, dun, 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 yeah. It's going to be a Lamborghini car. So impressive. Someone else decided that they were going to run as fast as they possibly could, that fast was the best way. Someone else decided that they were going to be carried on a luxurious chariot, draping with gold and furs, that the most luxurious was the best way to go down. And one person decided that the best way to travel the highway was just to take their time and enjoy themselves. Just take their time, look at the trees, look at nature, watch all the cool motorcycles and cars whizzing past them. Just take their time. So one by one, the people arrived before the king. The first one was probably the teleporter. But the second might have been the Lamborghini, but maybe not. Maybe the second one was the motorcycle, because as the other people started arriving, they were all like, King, hey, cool highway and all, but there was this big giant pile of rocks in the middle of it. There was a big giant pile of rocks that I had to traverse. It was hard to get my Lamborghini over. It was hard to get my motorcycle through. My chariot people had to actually put me down and carry all my golden furs over and then come back and get me. The runner who was running really, really fast tripped over it. And there's a big pile of rocks. And so they all said, Good highway, King, but you might want to do something about those rocks. And then they said, okay, so who won? Who gets the gold? Who's the best? Yeah? The teleporter. So we know what would happen. What's your name? Jude. We know what would happen if Jude were the king. So the people show up, and the king says, wait, there's one more person. We're still waiting for the person who's walking slowly, taking their time. And everyone's like, fine, I guess we'll wait. But then they waited, and they waited, and they waited, and they said, hold on, let me get to the end of the story. Is that okay? All right, thank you. They waited, and they waited, and they waited, and all of a sudden, this person shows up, and it took them way longer than anyone would have thought, even a person just walking and taking their time. Hold on, Jude, let me get to the end of the story. We're almost there. So the person shows up, and they are dragging behind them on an old piece of tarp they found this chest. And they said, Your Majesty, thank you for building us this beautiful highway. I'm sorry it took me so long to get here, but there was a big pile of rocks in the way when I made my way down, so I took my time to stop and move it out of the way for the next person to clear the path, and lo and behold, under that pile of rocks was this giant chest of gold. So could you please return it to whoever this belongs to? And the king said, it belongs to you. You won the contest. The best way to travel anywhere is to remove the barriers for those who come behind you. May we keep this in our hearts and minds as we go to our classes. We're going to sing you out. Thank you for coming today. It was so great to see all of you. Wait, hold on. Jude's been waiting. Couldn't
they just play video games instead of playing?
They could have just played video games instead of done this, but then that would have made a much less interesting story. Go to your classes. It's good to see all of you.
Let us recite our shared, our vision together. We seek answers everywhere, include everyone, and live with compassion. Do we have any announcements this morning? Marie?
Hi. I've been receiving packages on my porch this week, and this was in one of them. This is our official Good Trouble Congregation Award. We're one of only 25, I believe, churches across the country that got it, but together, all of us sent over 1 million texts, over 300,000 postcards, and on and on. I hope you will all join us all on Tuesday evening in Adams Hall. There's going to be an award presentation on Zoom at 7 o'clock, but if you get there early, you can have snacks and drinks with us before the show starts.
Good morning. My name is Yvonne. I'm with Social Justice, and I just want to remind everybody that if you haven't signed the letters yet, there's letters downstairs that you can sign to your members of Congress in support of maternal and child health and also global education. So they're downstairs in Adams Hall. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Check the UUCF website and our email blasts for other announcements of upcoming events. Our first hymn is number 155, Circle Round for Freedom. Please see the insert in your order of service, and we'll sing it through 3 times. Wow, that was a beautiful hymn. Our reading is by Jeannie Shiro. Black lives matter. Let the only burning be the fire of commitment in our hearts, minds, hands, spirits, in our community of faith. Live solidarity. Use your voice. Demand justice. Live it into being. Cry out for others to join you. Name hate as hate without shrinking back, without letting embarrassment or false humility or resistance or apologies for white skin get in the way. Direct all that energy to action, standing with, speaking out. Be impassioned. Imagine the cry for response if our predominantly white church burned and people said, well, that's too bad. Reminds me of another time. I heard that said from a human mouth. But that would not happen. Ours is not a black church. For us, the press would cover the story and swarm over it for days on end. Why is it different for our sisters' churches, our black churches? About that, be indignant. About the violent ending of so many black lives. Precious, precious, precious lives. Say it for every life that has been taken. You'd never stop speaking. Be outraged. About the burning of houses of worship, sanctuaries of the Spirit, sacred communal spaces. Be awakened. Racism is alive. It will never die of old age, ancient though it is. Rather, it must be burned by human awakening to equality incarnate. Participate in the movement. Call out those perpetuating violence against black people and black communities. Demand action from those in power, the press, government, and everywhere. This story is not being told. Live differently. How? Find out together. Struggle to awaken. Stay woke. There's no safe place from which to simply observe. All are already involved. Listen more often than speaking. Speak more often than being silent. When your words or actions could change the world, even just a bit, in the flesh, in real time.
Oh, y'all, I feel like I should just cede my time and we should just boogie. Goodness. Thank you, choir. Can I hear that? Thank you, choir. That's right. Yeah, give them another round of applause. We're going to bring the spirit. We're going to bring the spirit. All right, so it's almost the end of Black History Month. Isn't it weird that we have 1 month for Black History? That's another sermon. It's almost the end of Black History Month. And I don't think that I have talked about enough our great leaders of the civil rights movements here in the United States. If I was going to play Black History Month word association and I said, civil rights leader, what's the first name that would pop in your head? Martin Luther King Jr. Pretty easy, right? Give me another one. Okay, all right, right? All right. So then why do we have a whole holiday, justified, needed holiday for Martin Luther King Jr.? Where's Malcolm X Day? I've asked this question before. I've asked this question to congregants and my mother. And the answer that I get often is, well, because Martin Luther King Jr. was nonviolent, so we celebrate him. And Malcolm X was violent. He promoted violence, and that's not something that we wanted to celebrate. And as I started doing my reading, because y'all notice I'm doing another historical sermon, I can't get away from them. I was like, really? Is that true? As I started doing my reading and learning more about these men and their lives and the movements that followed in their wake, 2 questions arose. 1, are we getting our history right? And 2, do we understand what nonviolence means? Because nonviolence, it is not simply the act of not being violent. I am currently not being violent, but I'm not practicing nonviolence. Nonviolence is a spiritual stance. It's a practice in which not only are you not violent with your body, but you eschew violence from your mind and your heart. And nonviolence is also, very importantly, a political strategy. Nonviolence is a political strategy. We probably know where Martin Luther King got his ideas of nonviolence, where he did his reading. You know who? Gandhi, that's right. You all are so smart. Do you know where Gandhi first read about the idea of nonviolence? Ah, I thought I was going to get you. All right, so Gandhi was involved in protesting the British government. The British Empire had colonized India and said, hey, even though the salt is washing up on your beaches, we're going to take it away from you and sell it for ourselves in our own monopoly, because that's what empire and colonization do. And the people were like, I don't think that's fair. So they decided that they were going to fight back. Gandhi was involved in one early protest that became very violent. The British army descended on a group of protesters, and there was a violent clash. Gandhi was actually taken to jail, and he was like, oh, good, well, people will see now, right? People will see how violent, it was like an entire army and like some farmers, right? So people are definitely going to take our side. But then when he was sitting in prison, he just kept hearing over and over again, wow, there was just like a lot of violence. I don't know, there were good people on both sides. And he started thinking to himself, what are we going to do if us basically standing up for ourselves results in people saying, well, they were violent too? How are we going to win this? Because they're never, ever, ever going to see us as full human beings against this empire that shares their culture. So what are we going to do? Gandhi turned to his philosophers and his poets, but he's like, y'all are writing to me from like mountaintops and kitchen tables, and I cannot. I need somebody who's writing to me from behind the dark night of a soul that is a jail cell. Who can I read? And somebody said, Henry David Thoreau, who wrote one of his most, Unitarian Henry David Thoreau, who wrote, because I can't do a historical sermon without one Unitarian character popping up. Henry David Thoreau, who wrote one of his most influential essays from a jail cell. It was called Civil Disobedience. in which he argued that what was lawful was not always ethical. And Gandhi's reading this, and he's like, okay, I get that, but how do you know? How do you know? And Thoreau made the point that the way that you know you're being ethical is that you are doing the thing that is least violent. Thoreau was actually in prison for withholding his taxes, for refusing to pay taxes because the United States government was at war at the time and he refused to support war with his taxes, so he went to prison. And Gandhi was like, ooh, all right, well, violence isn't working. Maybe I'm gonna take this stance of nonviolence. I'm gonna take this stance of nonviolence. And he got a group of people together and he said, okay, next time when they attack us, don't attack back. We're gonna get the salt out of the ocean, and we're not going to attack back. And that's what happened. You can trust that violent empire will be violent. And they allowed the violence to be bestowed upon their bodies, and they didn't act back. And this time, the people in the papers, even though they were culturally aligned with the British Empire, they saw that clearly there were some good guys and some bad guys. The good guys were the ones who weren't throwing the punches. And Gandhi said, oh, not only is this something that is good for my spirit, this works politically. So he started writing about it. And Martin Luther King Jr. started reading about it, and he too at first thought that nonviolence as a spiritual stance was the most important thing that you could do. And so he took his people out into the streets, and he showed up in all the audacity of Black people exercising their civil rights. And you all remember his famous 1961 Albany campaign, right? No, nobody does, because for the entire summer, Martin Luther King Jr. and his people stood out in the streets of Albany, Georgia, or Alabama? Oh, Lord, I don't remember. Look it up. Georgia or Alabama, sorry? I thought somebody had already had the answer. And the point was, they stood out in the streets, and people kind of did their business around them. They were like, oh, there are some humans here. I'm gonna go shopping. They made a chain of their arms around the city hall, and people were like, I'm gonna duck under, thanks. I gotta pay my taxes. People didn't confront them. Law enforcement and citizenry writ large was like, do you, civil rights. And nothing happened. Nothing happened. And then King started reading further in Gandhi's writing, and he was like, all right, so nonviolence only works when you make something happen. So King started doing his own research, and he found that must have been Alabama, because just a town over he found that there was a sheriff who was a gut segregation. Yeah? Georgia! All right, I was right the first time. There was a gut segregationist in Birmingham, Alabama, by the name of Bull Connor, who would not be able to ignore Black people standing out in the middle of the streets in all the audacity of exercising their civil rights as Black people. So he brought his people there. And you know the story. You know the story that there was violent conflict that erupted. And before we go any further, I want to say something. I have no judgment whatsoever about this tactic. Black people's bodies have been brutalized forever. I have no judgment about displaying that in order to provoke a response. No judgment whatsoever. But King's biographers all agree that not only did he know what would happen if he brought his people to Birmingham, Alabama, that he sought it out. So let's just be clear here that when we're talking about nonviolence, we are not saying without violence. Okay, you might be saying, fine, Julie, but accepting violence as a possible consequence of your actions is very different than encouraging people to be violent. And we all know that's what Malcolm X did, right? Right? I mean, he said the thing, right? By any means necessary. Wasn't that the thing that he said? By any means necessary. But what by any means necessary? Does anyone else know the rest of that line? No, we don't say the rest of that line because that's the scary part. By any means necessary. Do you know what he was talking about when he said by any means necessary? I should know he gave this speech a couple of miles from my house in Detroit. By any means necessary, he was talking about the fact that they needed to build, that he and the Black community needed to build community centers in which their children could get education and access to health care, that they needed to become lawyers, to battle the legal system on their own, that they needed to grow their own food and study medicine, to become autonomous onto themselves, to guarantee that their children didn't have to live with the same brutalization that they did. He said, we are going to access basic human rights and defend our children from violence by any means necessary. Y'all, I became a mama 2 years ago, and that doesn't sound so ridiculous to me. I can't imagine what means I would not go to protect my child and get him basic human rights and dignities. And about violence, he actually addressed violence specifically in that speech. You want to know what he said? He said, I don't think that we should teach our people to react nonviolently in the face of violence against us. I think we should be nonviolent with those who are nonviolent with us. Be nonviolent with those who are nonviolent with us. So, self-defense. Self-defense. He didn't tell anyone to go out and commit acts of violence. He said it's okay if someone is violent with you to defend themselves. So by any means necessary. Actually, I wrote it down because I wanted to get it real right. Uh-oh, my papers are gone now. You might have taken it. Can I see? You think just your papers? Oh, goodness. It's real. Oh, I folded it up in my order of service. Y'all, this is why I don't do papers. This is what he said. We declare our right on this earth to be a human being, to be respected as a human being, to be given the rights of a human being in this society, on this earth, this day. And we intend to bring about this existence by any means necessary. I could see that read in any Unitarian Universalist church today, and people would be like, yeah, that makes sense. You should have basic human rights and dignity. So we've got Martin Luther King Jr., who is actively going out and putting himself in situations where violence might be provoked and telling people not to react with violence. And we've got we've got Malcolm X, who is utterly trying to avoid violence at all costs. He didn't want anything to do with white people, but said that if there is violence, you can react. Is one of them clearly the more violent one? In fact, the most controversial, I think, moment in the civil rights movement, the Children's Crusade, one of the most violent, one of the most controversial moments, was one of the only moments that Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X publicly clashed on. Martin Luther King Jr. and his folks decided that they were going to have a children's crusade in which they were going to send children to march in the streets. And Bull Connor released police dogs on them. There's a monument to it in Birmingham. They have changed the size of the dogs so that the dogs are now scaled so that adults can see how it would have looked if they were children walking through the monument. The muzzles face high. One of the scariest things a person could see, even if the dogs were just in stone. Malcolm X had a fit. He said to anyone who would listen, any paper, any radio station, a man doesn't send his children out to do his work for him. But it was effective. No one can argue that that didn't move the needle forward to getting that Civil Rights Act passed, that Voting Rights Act passed. And Martin Luther King said it was one of the wisest things that they had done in the campaign because of how effective it was. I guess you could say Martin Luther King Jr. wanted to bring about civil rights by any means necessary. Okay, all right. So then why do we have these narratives, right? It's not clear that one of them was right and one of them was wrong, that one of them was violent and one of them was not. So why have we had these narratives that have been sanitized and refigured and sent down to us through the ages? Why have we put them through the wash the way that we have? One, I think, is because we only ever tell half the story, but we'll get to that in a minute. And the second thing I would posit, and this might feel a little bit rough, but I think we can handle it. The second thing, I think, is because our narratives about these two men have very little to do with what they actually did and said, and rather how they made white people feel. How they made white people feel. Because in the beginning of his career, Martin Luther King, he had a dream. He had a dream of a multiracial society where we could all work together, hand in hand, beloved community under God. And that hits you in the soul. That's the kind of thing you want to build monuments to. Heck, we did. But Malcolm X, he was done with white people. He was done. He had sat in judgment and condemned us as irredeemable. He didn't want black and white society to mix because he had been too hurt by white people. And I wonder if we weren't as scared of his violence as we were of his condemnation. And they come from very different places to arrive at these stories, right? Martin Luther King, he had an upper middle class background, downright wealthy for a black person. His father was a figure in the community, and of course, he experienced racism. It would one day end his life. Of course, he experienced racism in the form of being told that he couldn't play with the little boy next door, or being called boy at the grocery store, which is horrible and terrible. But he also saw his father stand up against that treatment. His father once got pulled over for a traffic ticket, and when the police officer called him boy, he said, "Excuse me, my name is Reverend King." He saw that when his father gave that pushback, there was actually some wiggle room, and he said, all we have to do is push and assert ourselves. These people are movable. Malcolm X had a very different story. He grew up poor in a black activist family outside of Lansing. His family was terrorized by a white supremacist group called the Black Legion. His family was terrorized. In fact, it is very, very possible, they definitely burned down his childhood home. And it is very possible that they killed his father. His mother, at least, certainly believed that they did, and told him that story growing up as a child. And then his mother was unable to take the strain of all of the children and poverty. And so they threw her in a mental institution and him in some sort of foster care or group home. I'm sure the systems worked great back then for young black boys. They don't now. And Malcolm X, through all of this, still did his best. He got good grades in school. And so he went to one of his teachers and he said, "Hey, I don't think it's right what happened to my dad. I want to become a lawyer. I want to learn the law for myself." All of his dreams were bent on it. And she said to him, "I don't think the law is a place for black boys." And she didn't say black boys. And Malcolm X said, "Oh, okay, well, I guess there's no point in me going to school," so he dropped out, and he tried to get a job. He tried to get several jobs, and he could not make ends meet. He had younger siblings that he was trying to watch out for. So he joined a gang because it was the only economically viable way for him to survive. And then he got thrown in prison. And we all have a dark night of the soul if you're in prison. I've never actually been in prison. I've been arrested for civil disobedience, but it's a very different thing. But I hear from people like Gandhi and Thoreau and King and Malcolm X that you have sort of a dark night of the soul when you're in prison. He was sitting in prison and he said, I did everything right. I did everything right, and they took everything from me. There's no way. I am going to form my own society. And he was introduced to the Nation of Islam, who had the idea that they needed to form their own black nation because white people were irredeemable. And you see where they both got to the different places, right? You see where they got to the different places. So now we've got this story that doesn't make sense. We've got this story of Martin Luther King Jr. as being this conciliatory, pacifist, sort of just jolly guy showing up for the movement where he can. And we all know if that were true, he never would have made a name for himself, and we wouldn't be saying it today. And we have this image of Malcolm X as this like gun-toting, hair-trigger, angry black man uniting black people behind a haze of bullets. And we all know that that isn't true, or he would have been killed long before he could make such a name for himself. Just ask Fred Hampton. So we've got these two stories because we have very different asks from these very two different situations. Look, I think in my heart that Martin Luther King Jr. was right, that we do need to unite under some beautiful dream of a multiracial society where the content of our character is the most important thing. But I think if we're trying to do that now, we're skipping a lot of steps. You can't ask Malcolm X to show up nonviolent, turning another cheek, when still today we have a school-to-prison pipeline for young black boys. Do you know that somebody who is born black in the city of Detroit, in my hometown, has a 2/3 chance of graduating high school and a 1/3 chance of going to prison? Think about that for a minute. Think about that. You're at the lunch table with your two best friends. Look down the row. One of you is going to prison. Can you imagine? We can't talk about an equal society unless we change the structures. And we love the idea that MLK talked about. We love the idea that we can do that now, that if we eschew racism from our hearts like the good, white, liberal people that we are, that it will be enough. And Malcolm X tells us no. No, that's not enough. It doesn't matter what's in your heart. If my children's children still can't have access to health care and food and safe homes and education, we have to fix our society. It is naive to think that we can just begin on this path of multiracial, beautiful rainbow wonderland without fixing ourselves first. And do you know who would agree with me? Martin Luther King Jr., because we never tell the whole story. We never tell the whole story. All of the quotes that we hear from Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. are from the beginnings of their careers. They're from the beginnings of their careers. Darkness cannot chase out darkness, only light can do that. Just as hatred cannot chase out hatred, only love can do that. I have a dream that one day we will build a world where people are judged on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. I have come to find that my greatest impediment to racial justice is not the white Southern segregationist. He tells me who he is, but rather the white liberal who always tells me, yes, I agree with your goals, but not your tactics. Wait just a little bit longer. You hear that one all the time too, right? Was that King or was that X? That was Martin Luther King Jr. writing from a Birmingham jail cell. So here's what happened. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, they had a meeting of the minds. They both had a spiritual awakening. Martin Luther King Jr. went to prison and Malcolm X went to Mecca. And in prison, Martin Luther King Jr. received a letter from other religious leaders saying, man, can you tone it down? You're making us look bad. Just a minute. It's incremental change. Calm down. And he went, oh, this is never going to happen like this. Huh. And he penned the letter from the Birmingham jail, which I think is the most formational civil rights document that has been written in American history, my opinion. And Malcolm X went to Mecca, and he saw people. He saw people of all kinds of skin tones holding hands around this greater idea of unity. They had unity under Allah. Martin Luther King had the beloved community. We have the interdependent web. But this idea that everyone was united for a larger cause and that we were all connected and that we couldn't really separate ourselves. And he said, oh, my way's not going to work either. And so this man, Martin Luther King, who had thought that we could change our hearts and minds and souls, were like, came to say, oh, wait, no, we need to change our society first. We need to change our society. He started working on the Poor People's Campaign. That's what he died doing, the Poor People's Campaign. He started fighting the injustices, economic and racial. He started fighting the military-industrial complex and protesting the war in Vietnam. He started outright praising socialism at the end of his days in the 1960s, and that's when he got killed. And Malcolm X, he came back and he said, all right, so we have to restructure society, and I need you to do it with me. I don't like you, and I am mad at you, but I need you to do it with me. And he started uniting people across coalition. And that's when he got killed, because that's when he got really dangerous. So here's the thing. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, these two men who had very different lives, had very different philosophies at the beginning, came together at the end of their lives to tell us that we needed one thing. We needed to restructure our society, and we needed a spiritual reconstruction in the souls of white America. A spiritual reconstruction in the souls of white America. And that's why I'm bringing this to you today, this morning in church. Because y'all, I know that you didn't come here today only to hear fluffy sermons that lift you up. That's okay sometimes. And I know that you didn't come here today just for the coffee and cookies. It's good. I'm so glad it's here. I actually don't have a meeting. I'll join you. I'll see you later. I know that you came here today because you know that we Unitarian Universalists understood what Malcolm X thought about a brotherhood under Allah and what Martin Luther King said when he said a beloved community, that we have this interdependent web, that we are not separated by city limits and income brackets, that we are one another's people in humanity. We came here this morning to deepen our connections with one another, not just the people in the pews, but the people in the cities and the countries and all over the world, to deepen what it means to be a human being on this planet, to declare and stand with Malcolm X when he says that we need civil rights for everyone. But here's the thing. This is why it hasn't been fixed yet. It's hard, long, slogging work. And it requires a spiritual commitment. Because they're going to come after us and try to distract us. They're going to come after us and try to distract us. So we need to keep fresh before us the moments of our high resolve. Howard Thurman. Keep fresh before us the moments of our high resolve, the moments like this when we're remembering who we are and who we want to be in the world that not only King, but we dream about here together. We have to keep those moments fresh before us so that the next time somebody tells you that justice is incremental and that you should wait. Then we take out the letter from the Birmingham jail and we say, Justice delayed is justice denied. King wrote it right here. And by the way, the people that are telling you that change is incremental, it's not their kids that are drinking poisoned water and skipping meals. So the next time that someone tells you that there are cultural reasons that some people don't have access to health care and education, that you can know. Because it would be like convenient if we could believe that, right? Then we'd be off the hook. But it's a spiritual practice to remember that that is born of the same racism that says some people are just less than. That's what that argument says at the end of the day. It's a spiritual practice that we here have to remember as Unitarian Universalists, that we are part of an interdependent web of all creation, not creation that looks like us or thinks like us or loves like us or uses the same word for God, but all creation. Because they're going to try to distract us. They're going to fill our lives with more work and more meetings and more social engagements and more TikTok. And then they're going to say, here, put your own oxygen mask on first. And we have to remember that doing the work, the good work of the world, the spiritual work that connects us, that's actually what enlivens us and tells us what's important in life, more than any TikTok organizing video could. And we have to, in those moments, when they are handing you an oxygen mask, look around you and see that you are not separate from the people who aren't getting handed a mask. So when someone's handing you an oxygen mask and stepping on the throat of somebody else, we have to remember our Unitarian Universalism. We have to remember that we pledged that we are not separate, and we have to stand firm in our high resolve and say, if you hand me an oxygen mask and step on someone else's throat, my only response is, I can't breathe. May we work for a world where everybody in every body can breathe free. Blessed be, and amen.
Let there be an offering to sustain and strengthen this place, which is sacred to so many of us, community of memory and of hope, for we are now the keepers of the dream. If there are any visitors visiting us for the first time today, We'd like to meet you if you are comfortable standing up and telling us your name and how you found out about us. Hello?
I found out by research because I was looking for a church that gets off their knees and does something.
Amen.
Great, yes, amen. Welcome. Thank you. A perfect heart is one that has known love and loss, joy and sorrow. The perfect heart is one that has been shared. As joys and sorrows of our community are shared, please direct your energies, prayers, and meditations as a gift of compassion and strength. I didn't see any text messages. Anyone have a joy or sorrow they want to share this morning? Dante. Is number 168, and we will sing all 4 verses.
I got it. Y'all, I feel like I will never need another affirmation of my ministry ever again in my entire life, and I'm having trouble speaking, which is not usually true of me. Another thing that we don't talk about is another difference between the two men. Martin Luther King Jr. was speaking in the segregationist South, and for most of his career, Malcolm X was speaking in Detroit and New York. There was a little bit more freedom to say what he actually meant. So, what does it say that we created these spaces that were ostensibly open for people to speak their minds, and then later said, you said what you actually felt and meant? That was violent, and we're going to tarnish your legacy. Y'all, we have to listen. We have to listen to the modern day prophets. We have to listen to Tristan Taylor when he's leading Detroit Will Breathe out in the streets today. I'll give you his number if you want to invite him to speak here. We have to listen to our local heroes and our people that are going through the slog every day. We have to build connections across traditionally segregated lines, which means across race, across class, across generation. We have to, because we've all got a part of the story, and our truth is noble and real. But we're not going to fix this thing until my truth meets your truth, meets our truth. And then we can figure out at least a place to start. Thank you for coming this morning. Thank you for listening to one of my less uplifting talks. But sometimes the things that are hard to hear are the things that stir us to the most action. And I want us to get off of our knees and do something. Blessed be and amen. Go in peace. Return in love.